Welcome back to Plague Scythe Studios, everybody. Ryan here with yet another new companion for the Mercurial Boxo amps with the Sun. No, not that Sun, unfortunately. The SUN-100. If you're like me and feel the past 5 years have been condensed into what seems like 2, then you may be experiencing a similar feeling of deja vu that I have about this particular amp model, as it seemed like only yesterday that I had evaluated a very, very similar offering from what could be considered a competitor to Mercurial, though personally I hardly see them as direct competitors considering the scope and scale differences, but this is still going to be very important for the overall story today, as I feel the story is not really the new amplifier, because honestly, there's only so much I can say about an SLO, and those are the exact words I used in my first reply to Mercurial when they announced that this was coming and offered for me to take a look at it. Once again, very grateful for Mercurial sending this stuff pre-release for me to check out. I do appreciate it, but due to circumstances that surround this particular release and the nature of this amp model in general, I think it's more valuable for you guys to hear some of the feedback and answers to questions I had to Mercurial than it is for me to be playing twice as many riffs through this thing. So I'll definitely show you some more tones. I did make some more presets as usual, but like I said before, it's an SLO. You probably have a pretty good idea of what to expect if you are kind of a high gain amplifier connoisseur like I am. So I wanted to take this opportunity to kind of take a step back and get some feedback from Mercurial directly about some of the things that, as I told them, I've speculated about in the past, and especially about things that I'm not 100% satisfied about when it comes to the direction they've taken Ampbox, as well as some of the products that they've seemingly left behind to do so. Now, again, I'm not here to say that you have to do X, Y, and Z or I'll never buy a product again, or like you're some evil company. You know, we're talking about probably a handful of guys that are really passionate about amplifier design and modeling. I'm not going to take it to the extreme here. But what I do try to do in my videos is be the consumer advocate, in that I want variety, I want quality, and for a lot of those things, Mercurial delivers in spades every single time. But I can't say I'm 100% satisfied with the way things have progressed and are progressing, and I don't want them to continue on this particular path. And I'll certainly mirror some of the same sentiments that I have talked about in content that is of a similar subject. So with that, let's talk about some of the circumstances that surround this particular SUN-100 model release. First things first, as you might have noticed, I did miss out on a couple amp models releasing with the Tweed Blues and Tweed Bass. This was kind of just an accident in the sense that I was so wrapped up in things with the house and with other content I was working on that I was like, I don't really have time to cover this anyway. But this is the first release from Mercurial that really isn't in my wheelhouse anyway. I could definitely make content on it, and jamming through some of the presets and with the amplifier standalone and the demonstration only modes, they're fine. They're really good implementations, I think, of these particular amp circuits. But my first gut reaction to looking at these amps are, well, what's the big deal? You know, These are circuits that I can probably pull up in any run-of-the-mill big box store type of amplifier modeling software, even free versions of, and get a very similar sound. I 100% believe and trust Mercurial's response, especially to my SLO inquiries, that they really prioritize the minutia and the feel and the response, as well as the tone, obviously, of these amplifiers, because it comes across in demonstrations. It comes across, especially when playing them. But when it comes to more simple circuits like this, especially, I have a hard time saying, well, you need to go out and buy this if you already have something you're happy with, because there's not that big of a quality gap, I feel, especially in some of these edge of breakup or really clean examples, unless you get to like really crazy stuff that you're pushing ghost notes or high power amp saturation. And again, this kind of stuff isn't in my wheelhouse anyway, so I decided to stay back and not really make any commentary or presets on the thing. In addition to that, there was a flanger module that was released that I'm kind of looking at and going, well, that's an interesting inclusion. There's all kinds of, presets included. You can kind of get a phaser sound or a rotary speaker sound if you'd like. You can put it before or after the distortion and wah section up here. But it kind of goes back to some questions I've asked before of like, why this effect and why this effect now? Why did they include the micro pitch shift down here when they did and not prioritize other effects? Or why are they working on this at all when they could be backporting other products or working on new amplifiers, so on and so forth? So I wanted a little bit of insight into that process, as it does align with a lot of the things that I've criticized over the years, like the delay in reverb implementation, which I liked the way they were going with impulse responses. Fast forward to now, and we have yet another implementation of the SUN-100 in digital form, just like many, 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 many developers and vendors have released in the past. And that is certainly an aspect that I'll be talking about. But according to Mercurial, this is basically the regular circuit of the SUN-100 prior to the re-release in the past few years. So this is kind of the the 90s, early 2000s version, despite the depth control being up here instead of on the back of the amplifier in a modded fashion. So according to Mercurial, the specimen they modeled uses the original printed circuit board that was made by hand and the original transformers, and no additional modifications have been made to this platform to be represented in Ampbox. And all of that combined is kind of a head scratcher for me, because all of the previous releases in Ampbox share at least one common thread. So when it comes to something like the rectifier or the 5150, which in a lot of ways are kind of successors to the SLO circuit, both of those things borrowed very heavily from a lot of the tricks that the SLO does. And the SLO, of course, is a kind of an evolution of a hot-rodded JCM 800 and Plexi circuit. They all kind of share some DNA here. But when it comes to these two very popular amplifier circuit bases, there's still a trick in there. There's still something that you don't get all the time, and they're not really that popular when it comes to being modeled by other vendors. Make no mistake, there are a ton of rectifiers out there and a ton of 5150 style amps, but there are very few Rev G specific rectifiers. There are very few, or I really only seen one, I think, 6160 or 5153 stealth style amps. And when it comes to Mercurial's implementation specifically, I don't know that there's a classic switch to be able to go back and forth from the stealth version of the red channel to the 3 vanilla version. I certainly can tell you that no other rectifier VST plugin I know of has a mod switch for the gain potentiometer to kind of change that DNA. Not to mention that the quality level, I think, of these are noticeably better than a lot of the stuff that came before it, and there's just not that much competition to begin with. So despite these being very popular circuits and one that are kind of, I guess, metal vanilla in a lot of ways, these still manage to stand out. And that's what impressed me about them, where I'm like, oh God, here we go, another 5150. But they managed to impress with the way that they implement this particular circuit and this one as well, and yet still stay unique and original. On the flip side, with something like 1987X, it is based off of an amplifier that is super common, that you can find plugins of that are very high quality, but there's the trick that this thing is modeled off of kind of a one-of-one amplifier. Yes, it's probably a modification that you could have done in many places, but you still have to have the actual amp to do that. or you have to have the guts of the digital model to be able to implement that, and no one else really offers it. So, despite this being kind of a higher gain plexi, it's still unique, and you can't get this particular sound anywhere else. It starts to veer off into kind of redundant territory or like dangerously competing with other stuff that's out there, but yet this still manages to be unique. And for that, again, I applaud them. Then you get to this. Why? And that's essentially the next question that I hurled at Mercurial, asking why release the SLO especially now? I already kind of grilled another plugin vendor for releasing a model of the new SLO when there are already so many quality competitors on the VST plugin market. And don't get me wrong, I'm not necessarily, saying you have to take everything I say with 100% caution or that my opinion truly matters. It's that I think my opinion reflects the opinion of a lot of other people's, or at least their knee-jerk reaction when they see something like this. I go on to say, without trying Mercurial's version yet, I'm pretty confident that yours will be among the most faithful sounding, and I do believe that after playing through this for quite a while. However, compared to the unique Mercurial twists on your other semi-common amp platforms, like I just spoke about, this one seems unusually vanilla by comparison, especially if there are no mods, which there are not. There could be a sentiment among your customer base, one that I share, that Mercurial's time and effort would have been better spent on a more unique or hard to acquire amplifier model. Now, some of you may not agree with that. Some of you may think, I want an SLO from Mercurial because they do such great stuff, and that's fine. You have every right to buy this thing. But I can't help but look at this thing and go, how did we go from the U530 and the Reaxis, stuff that is so complex by comparison, both tonally and with the amount of options on offer here, and in terms of how few other people touch this stuff. How did we go from this to this? Again, the SLO is not a bad amp, it's a fantastic amplifier, but this doesn't seem like it belongs with some of these other amplifiers in here in terms of the unique factor. And I very much feel that I would rather see something that's harder to get my hands on or something that hasn't been released 500 times by other software vendors than this particular amplifier. Mr. Kirill Shmelo, I'm so sorry about butchering that name, I'm sure it's terrible, goes on to respond with what I unfortunately feel is mostly marketing, not really addressing my question, but I'll read it nonetheless. We believe that the Soldano SLO-100 is an excellent and versatile amplifier for various styles, especially for high gain. I don't disagree with that. With just one click, you can achieve a full modern distorted guitar sound even in a low tuning. Could you not say the same thing about your previous models or especially competitors though? At the same time, it features an excellent clean and crunch channel for a more classic sound. Same thing again. If you're thinking of an amplifier like the rectifier, it's important to note that they are not the same, which is of course true, but I did not imply that that was the case. With the SUN-100, we believe you can achieve a well-defined sound for various tasks much more quickly. It's important to note that the SLO-100 circuit differs from the circuits of other preamps we have worked on. I agree with that, it is different, but it is very much in line with the same kind of tones that you can achieve elsewhere, and at least for my money, if you've already got a 5150 and a rectifier, the SLO only fills in such a small gap that you can't get on the other amps that it seems, again, redundant. Now, if you'd done this the other way around, the SLO was first, and then you kind of graduate to the other ones, it kind of makes more sense, especially if the SLO was released really early on in the Ampbox, and you kind of filled in the gaps from there, then I probably wouldn't have any issue with it. But as it stands, I'm still not convinced this isn't redundant. The main distortion which is challenging to model is the operation of the two series connected cathode followers in the preamp circuit. However, we discovered the perfect way to make the simulation work without simplifying the model or putting excessive strain on the CPU. That's great, but hasn't basically anyone else who's modeled an SLO done the same thing? I'm not discounting the engineering efforts. I have no idea how to model a cathode follower or cold clipper based amplifier like this, but you've got too many competitors that sound pretty much right, even if they don't feel as good. You got, Fractal Audio and Line 6 and all these other amp modelers that supply the same thing in hardware format. So for me, the engineering achievement of this is not really a marketing point that any of your users are going to care about, nor should they really care about. Unlike profiling-based plugins, I feel like there's a subtle call out there, our implementation allows for a much closer approximation not only of the sound, but also of the feel of a real amplifier. We believe we've created a benchmark for the SLO-100 simulation. That I can't really disagree with, but none of that answers the question of why this amp? Why now? Why enter such a crowded market segment when so many people, especially Ampbox customers who are going to buy a lot of VST plugins, are already going to own an SLO-100? Now, it's not like I was exactly expecting them to spill their entire business strategy, and I'm sure some language barriers here. I seriously doubt that English is, their first language here, being in the region they're from, and that's totally fine. Or it could just be straight up avoidance, and that's, fine too. I'm not owed anything, but I was hoping to get at least some nugget of information that said, hey, we know what you mean, but let me assure you that we're working on all this stuff in between, and we're using this as kind of a, an easy thing to model or something we've always wanted to do as a pet project to fill in some cash flow. That would be a 100% perfect response in terms of like, okay, I see why you're feeling that way, but let me dispel that this is, lazy. And I'm not saying this is a lazy attempt or anything, but there was really no meat to that answer other than we think it's a great amp. And I think it's a great amp too. But they didn't address literally any of the major concerns I have here. And it's both in the sense of I have a concern from a pro-consumer standpoint, and I have a concern about the viability of releasing this thing in a crowded market. In the Ampbox ecosystem, though, the amplifier itself is only half, or really numerically less than half of the equation, as you have all of these overdrives, distortions, modulation effects, EQ, echo sections to pair with these amps. And I've voiced some criticisms over the years, especially for the past few releases, of it feels like there's not enough attention being paid to certain areas, and a lot of things have improved, especially the echo section. But I wanted to get a solid answer from Mercurial as to why they pay attention to certain things and not others, why certain effects release when they do. And unfortunately, I still don't have a satisfactory answer to this, but I will read what I have been given. So the flanger and other effects were added before the SUN-100 was released, since all analog effects were created using the same technology as the amps, aka fully matching the original circuit. This requires a considerable amount of work. However, it allows us to achieve maximum fidelity to the original. We plan to release new impulse responses, those being, I would assume, both in the cabinet and the echo, the reverb, delay types of impulse responses in the upcoming updates, which is nice. But that still doesn't really answer what my question was getting at as to why do you choose these effects when you do. And it could be just a random thing. Maybe you go, hey, let's model that next. That sounds cool. And that's the answer, so be it. But it feels like there's this constant game of catch up. And it feels like if I was a new customer going into this, the at least lack of this being fleshed out compared to, let's say, an Amplitude, it's going to leave me kind of soured. And I'm going to think, well, yes, the amplifiers sound amazing. And if that's all I'm going to use is a dry rhythm tone, then fine. But if I really like these lush echoes or just the immense variety of effects that something like Helix Native offers, this thing does not hold a candle to it in terms of what you're able to mix and match and the types of effects on offer. And again, I think the modeling is phenomenal on the modulation stuff, especially, and the overdrives and distortions. But from a value proposition, if you're trying to make the Ampbox platform this kind of one size fits all solution, whether you're playing one of the clean tweed amps or the SLO or the 5150, it feels like it's starting to fall short in some areas given the just sheer amount of amplifier sounds on offer now, especially when paired with some really good cab sounds. So it, again, doesn't really address the concern I was getting at in terms of it feels like this is falling behind, or it feels like maybe some more effort should be paid to that particular part of Ampbox. I'm not even saying for free. If you want to do a premium effects pack, okay. If it's worth the money, it's worth the money. But I don't really understand the strategy here, and I'm not entitled to. That's fine, but it's going to make me more and more hesitant to recommend investing in this platform going forward unless there's just really a specific knockout amp sound you're going for. That, though, leads us to what I feel is still the biggest outstanding issue with Ampbox, and that is the lack of SS11X and possibly more importantly to a lot of people, Spark. A lot of people, myself included, have wondered since Ampbox was released, why have these pivotal products not been included? I understand that when it comes to a lot of the backporting efforts, it would take a lot of engineering time to bring them up to the same modeling quality and algorithms used with the current stuff. That's no secret. But I have to ask, would it not be worth the effort? Do you not think you could sell more copies of it when you have this kind of refresh, this kind of second round of, hey, it's back and better than ever? I don't know that you're necessarily going to see a great return on investment, but I can't imagine that you won't see a resurgence in sales. Whereas right now, SS11X and Spark is just kind of in the background of their new product pages, and it's not really advertised. So I feel like it would be a better effort to bring it up to Ampbox standards and bring them in. At least you get another source of revenue there than leaving them out kind of in the cold. And I asked them about this, asking basically, why are they not here? Is it going to happen at all? And if it is, why has it not happened yet? And the response I received was essentially that they do not plan to transfer SS11X to Ampbox in any way, as it is a separate standalone and affordable product. I do agree with that, but what does the affordable aspect or the separate standalone aspect have anything to do with this question? As Reaxis was also, I think, a simple, standalone, affordable product for what it is, yet that was one of the first amplifiers added here, as was U530. It's more affordable, sure, and maybe they want to make it kind of a two-tier system where Ampbox is their premium stuff, they release other stuff, but why has other stuff not been happening if that's the case? It seems like Ampbox is the thing going forward for Mercurial. It is kind of their brand, like Pod or Helix's Line 6's brand, so it doesn't really make sense to me. It would fit wonderfully in the preamp section, and the ability to put that through a separate tube power amp that's in Ampbox would be choice, and you can do that, right? You just have to have two separate instances, SS11X in front of this thing, but it seems like an odd decision to me. And then when it comes to Spark, at least there is a glimmer of hope, as it may be partially ported to Ampbox technology in the future. We would like that, but it requires significant reworking of the original, which I don't doubt at all. But just like when it came to the answers about the SLO model, the engineering aspects of it is not something most consumers care about. And it is unfortunate because, I sympathize with it to a great extent, but it doesn't make good product sense not to do this. And again, I think a lot of that effort will be paid back. But it's just weird that there's this two-tier system. It's weird that things keep getting released when there's these kind of low-hanging fruits out there. And that's why ultimately I'm not real thrilled with this path that Mercurial's going down. I'm sure you got to make your money to keep the lights on, and I really hope that these guys are making a living doing this exclusively. But for me, this is not that path forward, and it doesn't have to do with the model quality. It's the novelty of it. It's the packaging of it. It's what value are you bringing to the table above anybody else? Because there's almost this issue of scope creep, where when they were just standalone products like U530 or Euphoria or Reaxis, and there weren't that many effects, it was like, okay, no big deal. The effects they have are pretty good. They go with this amp model. And if I don't like it, I'll just put on other stuff and treat this like the standalone amp it is, no problem. But when you make an all-in-one platform, the scope changes. And I feel like the scope of the overall effects that go with it hasn't increased proportionally to the amps. It almost feels like they're biting off more than they can chew in a lot of ways. As you'll hear in these audio demonstrations, it does everything you would expect an SLO to do. The clean channel is smooth as glass until you flip that bright switch and dial up the gain. You can get some crunchy rockabilly type stuff. The crunch channel is like just the mid-gain Marshall Slayer, does everything you want it to do. And that way you can boost it with a pedal and get some really great mid to high gain tones. And of course, the lead channel is the lead channel. It is kind of a platform on which basically all modern high gain distortion was built off of. And it still is a modern high gain type of sound for a lot of stuff. But for me, it's just a little too mushy and not quite trimmed up enough in some frequencies to be useful for the music I make. But for what it is, it's a fantastic amplifier. But it's kind of hard to go backwards. It's kind of weird if you model, the successor in a lot of ways, more than spiritual, like circuit successors to a certain platform, and then you go backwards. The short conclusion here is this: if you have no other SLO type of sounds at your disposal, whether it be a hardware amp modeling pedal or some type of VST plugin, and you're looking for something that's premium and like the best of the best for that particular amplifier tone, you're not going to find anything really much better than this. I think the Nimbrini sound is really good. I think this one's better. I think even the Neural DSP one, despite it being kind of that high gain alias fizz thing that they're notorious for, it still sounds really good and that can be worked around. But if you're coming at this fresh, and again, you want to pay money, this is a great model. It sounds freaking awesome. And if there's other stuff within the Ampbox ecosystem, you buy one or two more, you kind of complete the package you're happy with, phenomenal. You got some really good effects that work with that. The problem is, I feel like with the SLO being what, let's see, just rough math here, 35 plus years old. If you want an SLO sound, you have one, right? Whether it's free, whether it's something that's even remotely related to it, like the modern high gain stuff on the original pod, or a Kemper profile. And don't get me wrong, I agree with Mercurial that this model will feel better in a lot of ways and react more realistically than a profiled model. But is it $80 better? I don't know. Really depends on how you use it. Again, if you can make money with this kind of stuff, then who cares about the price ultimately? But as someone who's looking for, a good bedroom solution or wants to make music with it, you're going to get good results out of some freeware. I'm telling you, the SLO is just so ubiquitous when it comes to modeling that a lot of people have really figured this stuff out. And I have no doubt that Mercurial's accurate implementation of this is among the best in the software world. But I don't know. I just have a real hard time getting stoked about this particular circuit because it's basically like presenting a vanilla JCM 800 or a vanilla Fender Blackface. It's like, guys, this is bone stock at this point. This to me would be kind of like releasing Halo 2 or Call of Duty 4 multiplayer as the release versions were today, again with no changes, and being like, aren't you guys stoked for it? You know, you guys really loved that back in the day. They were sensational and the SLO was sensational. But I'm going to be like, well, no, because I've got it already. Why would I do that again? What are you even selling at that point? We've all experienced this. I could grab my old copy, or dozens of other publishers and developers have iterated on this type of multiplayer platform or first-person shooter platform to where this is so bone stock and vanilla that it's almost not even unique anymore. In fact, this particular flavor of it is not unique because we've gone so far past what those things have to offer. And if I want to revisit it, I can. Great, but if you wanted to, you've already done that. So again, it's like if they sold an unremastered version of Call of Duty 4, which they did remaster eventually, you want to call it that. It's like, well, what's stopping me from just buying the original? What's stopping me from already owning something that does this? So that's kind of where my level of excitement is for this kind of stuff. So if Mercurial continues down this path, if there's another 2 or 3 amplifier releases in a row and Spark is not paid any attention and there's no real moving of the needle when it comes to effects, and the amplifiers that are coming out are kind of something that I can get really good sounds out of freeware with, I'm not going to be covering them anymore, which would be really, really disappointing because I don't think it's probably a secret to many people. I love what Mercurial does. They're probably my favorite amplifier VST plugin vendor overall when it comes to what they choose to cover and the quality of their stuff. But this feels eerily familiar to some of the things that I was talking about before I had another certain plugin vendor and technology company on kind of my channel blacklist. So let's not go down that route, please. And again, I'm not trying to sound like some drama junkie or making mountains out of molehills here. It's ultimately just amplifier models at the end of the day. You can choose to buy them or not. But I hope some of you kind of understand the concerns I have, because we see this similar trend in a lot of places in technology, in consumer goods, where it's like 50,000 other people are doing this. Why do you think you're doing the best job? Or how are you going to sell it to me? How are you going to tell me that if Johnny has vendor B or manufacturer C's plugin of this same thing, how are you going to convince me to invest in your platform? Why are you willing to take that risk and get in such muddied waters and such stiff competition to begin with? Have you ran out of ideas? Surely not. Surely there's something more enticing to a lot of people than just an SLO. And just an SLO is an understatement. It's a great implementation of it, and it's a great circuit for a lot of ways. But all I'm going to say is, Mercurial, please release something that's a little more unique, something that I can't get from other vendors. I'm not saying the quality level is the same, but it's within the ballpark. Or I'm just not going to be interested in covering things anymore. Again, I don't think this is malicious or like totally anti-consumer, but from a pro-consumer point of view, I can't recommend this to most people who already have an SLO sound they're happy with. So I'm hoping the next rounds of updates we see not only are more rare amplifier circuits or things that stick out a little more, but they include some love and attention to their past products that I think need to be in their all-in-one amplifier suite. So let me know what you think down below. Again, not trying to stir up trouble or anything like that. This is honestly how I feel about this situation. And, if you really like the tones, you're not doing anything wrong, but I'm just not really stoked with this one as I was with Rectifier or the 5150 or the modified Plexi. So again, let me know what you think down below. Thanks so very much for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.